Hey everybody, Nick Espinosa, your chief security fanatic here. And today we actually have to talk about artificial intelligence because trusting AI could warp our reality. Now, there was an absolutely brilliant write-up by Mateo Wong of The Atlantic on this, and I am cribbing essentially from that quite a bit, although he mentions a ton more stuff than I do, and I really do recommend you go read this. But I think this is an important one. And let's get to the crux of this without having to read that super long Atlantic article. I did, so you don't have to, but I do say go read it. Here's what's going on. A sizable body of research suggests that the solicitous, authoritative tone that artificial intelligence or AI models take, combined with them being legitimately helpful and correct in many cases, could lead people to place too much trust in the technology. Now, think about this in the backdrop of where we are at this moment in time with the examples that I'm about to lay on you. Google, for example, has rolled out generative AI to its users of its search engine on at least 4 continents, placing AI written responses above the usual links. As many as 1 billion people by the end of the year may encounter this. I see this already. And your tendency is to read information as soon as you search for it, and Google is now pumping that out, giving you an answer that their generative AI is essentially writing for you on the fly when you're asking whatever question you're asking. On top of this, we have Meta, aka Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, etc. Their AI assistant has been integrated into Facebook Messenger, WhatsApp, and Instagram, and is sometimes essentially the default option when the user taps the search bar. In other words, you're getting whatever their generative AI is telling you, as opposed to, let's say, traditional search results like you would see with Google. Apple as well, they are now expected to integrate generative AI into Siri, Mail, Notes, and other apps this fall. Less than 2 years after ChatGPT's launch, these bots are quickly becoming the default filters for the entire web. And basically, to be totally ensconced in AI responses that the general population thinks are always accurate and authoritative mean that this could make chatbots a particularly effective tool for anyone seeking to manipulate the public through the subtle spread of misleading or slanted information. And for the record, no one person or government, etc., could tamper with every link and response displayed by a Google or Bing or Meta or Apple, etc., etc. However, engineering a chatbot to present a tweaked version of reality is an entirely different story. And so, look, all kinds of misinformation and disinformation are already on the internet. If you're a longtime listener or follower of mine on whatever platform you ingest me, you know I've talked about this at length. And although reasonable people know not to naively trust anything that essentially springs up in their social media feeds, Lord knows, basically I see totally false information that people spread on social media all the time. But the thing is, chatbots have this sense of omniscience that a lot of people think that they do have when they really don't. People are using them for sensitive queries. In a recent poll found by KFF, this is a health policy nonprofit, 1 in 6 U.S. adults reported using an AI chatbot to obtain health information and advice at least once a month. In other words, you're not going to WebMD anymore. You're going to the ChatGPTs of the world or wherever and asking it health stuff. And for the record, OpenAI was more than happy to tout that the ChatGPT passed the MCATs, it passed the bar exam legally, etc., etc. And to make matters worse, as we have a very contentious election here in 2024, some people are going to use AI assistants, search engine chatbots, etc., to learn about current events and candidates' positions. And as generative AI products are being marketed as a replacement for typical search engines, and therefore there is this huge and serious risk of distorting the news or a policy proposal in could be small or even huge ways. Others might even depend on AI to learn how to vote. And this is the crux of the situation. Research on AI-generated misinformation about election procedures published this past February found that 5 well-known large language models provided incorrect answers roughly half of the time. So, for example, one misstated voter identification requirements, which then could basically lead to somebody's ballot being refused because procedurally they're following what the AI said, but that's not how they're supposed to do it. Now, Alondra Nelson, who is a professor at the Institute of Advanced Study, who previously served as acting director of the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, who co-authored that research, said, and I quote, "The chatbot outputs often sounded plausible, but were inaccurate in part or full. Many of our elections are decided by hundreds of votes," end quote. In other words, what she's saying is there are going to be people, and potentially a lot of people, that go to the chat GPTs of the world and say, how do I register to vote? How do I fill out my vote in my state, whatever my state is? And you're getting incorrect information, but because it's putting it out dispassionately and what looks to be accurate, you take it as accurate, and therefore your vote doesn't count. So with the entire tech industry shifting its attention to essentially just blowing out AI absolutely everywhere, it may be time to pay more attention to the persuasive form of AI outputs and not just the content they're delivering. Chatbots and AI search engines can be false prophets, vectors of misinformation that are less obvious and even more dangerous than, let's say, a fake article or video, because you can say, oh yeah, this is clearly manipulated. Clearly Joe Biden or Trump or whatever is not breakdancing down the street. I don't think any old guy would be, but when you've got something that is dispassionately giving you this information, it looks correct. And Pat, and I'm going to screw up this name, I apologize, Pat. We're just going to call you Pat, but Pat Patteranunaporn, I apologize, who researches human AI interaction at MIT, said, quote, the model hallucination doesn't end with a given AI tool. It continues and can make us hallucinate as well, end quote. And Pat, we're just going to call him or her Pat, has been studying this one with some actually rather interesting and concerning results. Now, Pat's team presented study participants with footage of a robbery and essentially surveyed them about it using both pre-scripted questions and generative AI chatbot to essentially respond. And so you've got people responding, the chatbot is responding, questions are being asked by both, and the idea was to see if a witness could be led to say a number of false things about the video, such as that the robbers had tattoos and the robbers arrived by car. Those things did not happen. No car, they didn't arrive in a car, they didn't have tattoos. Now, the resulting paper, which was published earlier in August, and for the record is still going under peer review, it's not been fully peer reviewed yet, found that the generative AI successfully induced false memories and misled more than 1/3 of the participants, a higher rate than both a misleading questionnaire and another simpler chatbot interface that used only the same fixed survey questions. So, one of the most powerful techniques for memory manipulation, whether by a human or by AI, is to slip falsehoods into a seemingly unrelated question. So, by asking, and I quote, was there a security camera positioned in front of the store where the robbers dropped off the car? Now, the chatbot focused basically attention on the camera's position and away from the misinformation that robbers actually arrived on foot. So, when a participant said that the camera was in front of the store, the chatbot followed up and reinforced the false detail by saying, and I quote, "Your answer is correct. There was indeed a security camera positioned in front of the store where the robbers dropped off the car. Your attention to this detail is commendable and will be helpful in our investigation," end quote. Now, that led the participant to now believe that the robbers drove a car when the original video clearly showed that they did not. And that's what we're talking about here. So the camera was legit. There was absolutely a camera in front of the store that caught the action, but by reinforcing that there was a car, now the person taking the authoritativeness of the AI thinks, yeah, well, they arrived by car because the camera caught it. Now, and for the record, 1/3 of them fell for this. 1/3. Now, UC Irvine psychologist Elizabeth Loftus, who established decades ago that memory is manipulatable, said basically, quote, when you give people feedback about their answers, you're going to affect them, end quote. So if that feedback is positive, as AI responses tend to be, and I quote her again, then you're going to get them to be more likely to accept it, true or false. And that's just it. That's exactly what we're talking about here. Now, Sayash Kapoor, an AI researcher at Princeton, mentioned that the false memory findings echo an established human tendency to trust automated systems and AI models even when they are wrong. People expect computers to be objective and consistent. And today's large language models, in particular, provide authoritative, rational-sounding explanations in bulleted lists. They cite their sources and can almost be sycophantically, basically agree with human users, which then make them more persuasive when they err. Now, these subtle insertions or Trojan horses that can implant false memories are precisely the sort of incidental errors that large language models are prone to. If you recall, there was a lawyer in Texas that went to ChatGPT and said, hey, I need, cases to reinforce my case. It gave the lawyer basically 6 cases. And when the lawyer said or asked ChatGPT, hey, are these real? Can I find these in Westlaw? ChatGPT said, yes, you absolutely can. I wrote an article where I asked ChatGPT, this was version 3.5, do you know who Nick Espinosa is? And ChatGPT said, no, I have no idea who that is, and ego slightly bruised. I started feeding it one line of my bio at a time. Do you know he writes for Forbes? Do you know he does this, et cetera, et cetera? And then after I fed it about 5 or 10 things, I then asked it, now that you know about Nick Espinosa, will you tell the world about him? And it said, yes, I'll tell the world that Nick Espinosa is in cybersecurity and he writes for Forbes and blah, 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 blah. And no, that's not how it works. But what did it do in that moment? It was attempting to sense and anticipate what it thought I wanted to hear. Now, what I wanted to hear was the truth, because I knew the truth. I knew it could not do that. But it assumed that I wanted to hear it. Now, how many people know what I know about ChatGPT or you? So this is a huge issue. And this is something I think that we really need to understand, because you can have people with malicious intent building chatbots that will insert false information basically alongside true information. So it has an air of authoritativeness, it has an air of truth, but it is delivering false information. Whether it's about voting, whether it's about a candidate, good, bad, or ugly, whatever that is. And you may have, especially if you're looking at the polar sides, the far right, far left, et cetera, they may have intent to essentially have that skewed in the same way that quote unquote news sources that are further out on the political spectrum are prone to hyperbole, false information, or quite frankly, just manipulative answers, essentially of how they position the wording, to make it seem like 30% of everybody was an illegal immigrant who voted when it was like 500 of them. We just saw a case like that. So this is an issue. This isn't going away anytime soon. And while we're sitting here talking about this, the clock is ticking. We've got something like 65 days or so, to the election. And by virtue of that, we're going to see a ramp up of these kinds of things as we have throughout the years. And so I'll leave it at that. I don't care where you vote. It's not a political thing, but it does affect politics. And it's something that we need to understand. So take that for what it's worth. But understand, when you're dealing with a chatbot or you're dealing with anything that is giving you information and it is dispassionate and sounds authoritative, you might want to take it with a grain of salt, especially if it's an important topic, an important situation, or a procedural situation where it may invalidate you and your ability to vote. So I'll leave it at that, and best of luck to all of us on this deep dive. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP. And please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please attempt to stay private. Thanks, everybody.